You sit before me tonight with a quietness that is not weakness, though many have mistaken it for such. Silence has always been the veil through which the deeper movements of the psyche rise. And the empath is the one who has carried silence like an invisible inheritance. Yet, beneath that quiet surface lies a storm that has been forming for years, perhaps for a lifetime, perhaps for generations. When an empath enters the rise that no one believed they had inside, it is not the rise of the ego, nor the rise of ambition, nor the rise of defiance. It is the rise of something older, something that belongs to the realm of the archetypes, something that the collective unconscious has been nourishing in secret. You are not rising against the world, you are rising into yourself. You see, the empath's journey has always been misunderstood. Many have expected your softness to signal fragility, your compassion to signal yielding, your sensitivity to signal defeat. People have mistaken your attunement to the emotional body for a lack of strength, but sensitivity is the oldest form of intelligence, the kind that comes from perceiving what the rational mind cannot grasp. The empath is the one who feels the tremor of a lie before the lie is even spoken, who hears the cry beneath someone's laughter, who recognizes the shadow moving behind a mask long before the person wearing it does. This is not weakness, it is a psychic inheritance, a gift from the unconscious, though it often comes wrapped in suffering. For many years, the empath learns to suppress this gift. They learn to quiet themselves so others can feel comfortable. They learn to take responsibility for emotions that never belong to them. They learn to dim their inner fire so others are not intimidated by its warmth. The rise that is happening inside you now is not merely a moment of courage. It is the moment the psyche refuses to continue betraying itself. That betrayal, subtle, unconscious, woven through childhood wounds and ancestral memory, has lived within you as an inner split. Jung called it psychic dissociation. The moment the soul divides itself to survive the conditions of the world it was born into. Empaths are often born into environments where their gifts are not recognized, where their intuition is dismissed as exaggeration, where their emotional clarity is punished, where their ability to sense truth becomes a threat to those who fear being seen. And so the empath becomes invisible by necessity, not because invisibility is natural to them, but because invisibility is safe. Yet every time you step away from your own depth, something within you keeps count. Every time you silence yourself to protect someone else's illusion, a part of your psyche withdraws into the shadow. It does not die. It waits, and when the moment comes, as it is coming now, that hidden part begins to rise. The rise is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not an act of rebellion or vengeance. It is the slow, inevitable return of the parts of you that were exiled from your own life. It is the self-reclaiming authority from the wounded ego. It is the unconscious sending signals upward, saying, you cannot carry the world anymore. You must carry yourself. Many people around you will not understand this transformation because they only mapped your surface, never your depth. They saw your gentleness and assumed it was your entirety. They did not see the archetypal forces moving within you, shaping you. They did not see the warrior hidden in the servant, the king hidden in the caretaker, the truth seer hidden in the peacekeeper. But those who underestimated the empath always make the same mistake. They fail to recognize that the one who understands others deeply is also the one who can transform themselves most completely. There is a moment in the individuation process, a moment that cannot be faked or forced, where the psyche refuses to continue bending unnaturally. It straightens itself as a tree does after years of leaning toward a single source of light. This straightening is the rise. It is the moment your inner axis aligns with something eternal. When this happens, your relationships shift, your boundaries sharpen, your intuition becomes louder than your fear, and the people who once relied on your silence begin to feel threatened by your clarity. You may think the rise is happening because you are suddenly stronger, but strength is not what has changed. What has changed is that you have stopped abandoning yourself. You are no longer negotiating with your own soul. You are no longer dimming what was meant to illuminate the path ahead. The empath's rise is not an event. It is an awakening of the internal world that has been waiting for permission to step forward. And you are the only one who can give that permission. When I speak of the empath's inner rise, I am not speaking metaphorically. In dreams, this rise appears as upward movement, ascending mountains, climbing spiral staircases, emerging from the sea, rising above a vast forest. These are not random images. They are the psyche's way of communicating that the unconscious is beginning to integrate itself with the conscious mind. Archetypal dreams are reliable indicators of transformation. When an empath begins to rise, their dreams intensify. They dream of fire, of doors, of old houses, of ancient rooms opening after being locked for decades. They dream of birds suddenly taking flight, of serpents shedding their skin, of water becoming clear after years of being murky. These symbols are not accidents, they are revelations. They show the psyche's readiness to move from passive empathy into active potency. When someone is born an empath, the world often teaches them that their role is to soothe, to absorb, to soften, but deep in the collective unconscious, the empath archetype has a second face, one few have ever been allowed to see. The first face is the healer. The second face is the truth bringer. The empath who rises does not rise to comfort others. They rise to reveal what has been hidden, to show what others refuse to see, to embody a clarity that threatens the lies in the room. That is why so many have doubted your strength, not because you lacked it, but because they feared what your strengths would reveal about them. They needed you small so their masks could stay intact. The empath's rise begins with a simple but profound moment, the refusal to internalize pain that does not belong to you. That is the moment your shadow begins to reintegrate. The shadow of the empath is not aggression or cruelty. The shadow of the empath is suppressed truth. It holds the anger you never expressed, the intuition you dismissed to maintain harmony, the self-respect you sacrificed for connection, the boundaries you dissolved to be loved. When the shadow begins to rise, it does not do so to harm. It rises to restore balance. People often fear their own shadow because they misunderstand it. They think the shadow is the immoral part, the dangerous part, the dark part, but the shadow is simply the part of you that has been disowned. For the empath, the shadow holds the qualities that would have protected you from exploitation. It holds your assertiveness, your clarity, your strength, your ability to walk away. When these qualities begin to rise, the empath enters a new psychological state, a state the world rarely expects from someone who has been so quiet, so gentle, so self-sacrificing. In this state, the empath becomes a mirror, not the soft mirror that reflects only what others are comfortable seeing, but the archetypal mirror that reveals the hidden face of the soul. Narcissists, manipulators, and emotionally immature people cannot tolerate this mirror, because it exposes the truth they spend their lives avoiding. Your rise is not an attack, yet it will feel like a threat to those who benefit from your silence. This is why the empath's rise is often met with resistance, misunderstanding, or even hostility. Those who underestimated you are not reacting to your strength. They are reacting to the sudden disappearance of their control. The collective unconscious contains stories of this rise. In myth, it is Persephone returning from the underworld, not as a frightened maiden, but as queen. In alchemy, it is the moment the white phase gives way to the reddening, when the inner fire awakens. In psychology, it is the movement from projection to integration. The empath begins to see that the qualities they admired in others were hidden within themselves, and the qualities they feared in others were fragments of their own shadow. This recognition is the turning of the inner wheel. When the wheel turns, the ego trembles, but the self stabilizes. You may have felt as though you were breaking down in recent years. You were not breaking down, you were breaking open. The unconscious rarely rises gently. It often shakes the structures of one's life so the deeper truth can emerge. Empaths experience this as emotional exhaustion, spiritual disorientation, or a sudden refusal to tolerate dynamics that once felt normal. These are signs of psychic restructuring. The old identity is dissolving so the authentic one can rise. And now that it is rising, something remarkable is happening. People around you are beginning to sense a shift. They cannot describe, they feel your energy withdrawing from old entanglements. They feel your presence becoming clearer, sharper, more unmoved. They feel your inner world solidifying into something they cannot easily influence. This unsettles them, not because you are doing anything aggressive, but because you are no longer providing the emotional elasticity they once depended on. They cannot stretch you anymore. They cannot bend you anymore. You are no longer a container for their unresolved chaos. You are becoming a container for yourself. And as this container strengthens, you begin to feel something you may not have felt since childhood, an inner center, a place within you that does not move when the world pulls, a point of stillness that does not distort when others project, a core that does not collapse when someone withdraws love or approval. This inner center is not built through willpower. It emerges through the cessation of self-abandonment. You are simply allowing yourself to return to the truth of who you were before the world convinced you to become smaller. Many empaths do not realize that their rise is not an addition, but a restoration. You are not becoming something new. You are remembering something ancient. The moment you stop negotiating with people's expectations, the unconscious offers you back the pieces you once disowned, the strength you lost when you first silenced yourself, the intuition you dismissed because no one around you understood it, the truth you swallowed because it frightened those who depended on your compliance. As each piece returns, the empath's silhouette changes. Those who once knew you will say they do not recognize you, but that is because they never truly saw you. They saw the version of you that you curated for their comfort. Your rise, therefore, is not a performance. It is not for display. It is an inner alignment that eventually becomes visible simply because truth cannot stay hidden inside the psyche forever. The unconscious does not tolerate lies for long, not lies told by others, and certainly not lies told by yourself. And the empath's greatest lie is the lie of pretending to be fragile. Fragility was never your nature. It was your disguise. You wore it to survive the emotional climates of the people you loved. But every disguise must eventually dissolve, or it becomes a prison. When you begin to remove the disguise, your relationship with power shifts. Power no longer feels like something external, something you must earn, chase, or compete for. Instead, it feels like something that flows through you, as a river through a valley. This is because true power, the kind that emerges from individuation, is not domination over others, but sovereignty over the self. It is the realization that your inner world no longer bends under the weight of other people's stories. You are no longer maintaining their illusions at the expense of your truth. And when you step into this state, others feel it before you do. They sense the change in your presence. They sense the subtle withdrawal of your emotional labor. They sense the quiet but undeniable shift in the way you hold yourself. You no longer rush to rescue them from their discomfort. You no longer soften your tone to keep the peace. You no longer absorb what they refuse to process. They feel the gravity around you changing, and some will panic because they depended on your willingness to carry what they refuse to hold. They will say you have become cold, but this new coldness is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the refusal to sacrifice your integrity, to maintain someone else's comfort. It is the absence of emotional manipulation, your own and theirs. The empath who rises becomes emotionally neutral in situations where they once felt overwhelmed, not because they feel less, but because they no longer confuse compassion with self-destruction. This neutrality is the mark of psychological maturity. It is the moment you begin to operate not from guilt or fear, but from inner truth. In dreams, this shift often appears as a new landscape, vast plains replacing claustrophobic rooms, clear skies replacing fog, running water replacing stagnant pools. The psyche communicates through images long before the ego understands the transformation consciously. An empath nearing their rise may dream of climbing a hill and finally reaching the summit after years of wandering. They may dream of a childhood home, but with its rooms rearranged or illuminated by a new source of light. They may dream of standing before a mirror and seeing a different self looking back. These dreams are not fantasies. They are psychological milestones. They signal that the unconscious is preparing you for a new identity, one that integrates both your sensitivity and your strength. To understand the rise of the empath, one must understand the law of opposites. What you have suppressed becomes the root of what you one day become. The empath suppresses their fire to appear gentle. One day, that fire becomes their boundary. The empath suppresses their intuition to appear agreeable. One day, that intuition becomes their shield. The empath suppresses their truth to maintain harmony. One day, that truth becomes their liberation. The rise is born from everything you once betrayed in yourself, and those qualities, once exiled, return with a kind of sacred authority. It is here that we must speak of the archetypes, because the empath's rise is not a personal journey alone. It is an archetypal pattern. In the collective unconscious, the empath corresponds to the healer, the sage, the oracle, the innocent, and sometimes the exile. But when the rise comes, a new archetype awakens the warrior of light, not in a naive or romantic sense, but in the true Jungian sense of the psychic warrior who confronts the darkness within and refuses to remain fragmented. The empath who rises is no longer merely a receiver of emotional information. They become an interpreter of it, a master of it, a sovereign of it. This is why the rise is so powerful. You are integrating both sides of your nature, the soft and the sharp, the receptive and the assertive, the healer and the protector. When this integration begins, the empath often feels an unexpected surge of instincts. They feel an urge to withdraw from people who drain them. They feel an urge to speak truth even when it disrupts harmony. They feel an urge to walk away from relationships that once felt familiar. These instincts are not reactions. They are communications from the unconscious, guiding you toward alignment. Many empaths resist these instincts at first because they confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. But the unconscious is relentless. It will continue sending signals, dreams, synchronicities, emotional discomfort, until you finally allow yourself to follow the path meant for you. People around you may accuse you of changing suddenly, but the truth is that nothing about your essence has changed. What changed is your willingness to betray yourself for the sake of belonging. You no longer seek validation in places that require you to shrink. This shift is profound when the empath stops shrinking. They do not simply become bigger, they reveal that they were never small. They were merely living in a psychological posture that disguised their true proportions. And so the rise continues inward. You begin to see clearly what was once distorted. You begin to notice that many relationships in your life were built on your silence, not on mutual respect. You begin to see that the people who called you too sensitive were often the ones who feared what your sensitivity revealed. You begin to understand that the love you gave so freely was often taken for granted because it was given to people who did not know how to hold something so rare. This clarity is painful, but it is liberating. It frees you from illusions that depleted your energy for years. At this stage, many empaths experience what feels like a psychological emptiness. It is not depression, though it may resemble it. It is the empty space left behind when the false self dissolves. The psyche needs this emptiness to rebuild. It is the silence before the new voice emerges. It is the stillness before the new identity takes shape. This emptiness is sacred. It is where the unconscious begins to show you what you were always meant to become. As you dwell in this sacred emptiness, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start recognizing your own patterns. You see the moments you abandoned yourself. You see the emotional burdens you carried that were never yours. You see the ways you diminished your light so others could feel comfortable in their shadows. And instead of feeling guilt, you feel compassion, not for others, for yourself. This self-compassion is the beginning of inner sovereignty. It is the moment the empath stops seeking external permission to exist fully. When this realization sets in, the rise accelerates. You begin to detach, not from people, but from illusions. You detach from the expectation that others will understand you. You detach from the need for approval. You detach from the role of emotional caretaker. This detachment is not coldness, it is psychological cleanliness. You are removing the residue of years of emotional entanglement. You are clearing the inner path so your rise can continue uninterrupted. You must understand something essential. The world never believed in your rise because they never saw your inner world. They saw your outer behavior, which was shaped by survival patterns. They saw your gentleness, not your discernment. They saw your kindness, not your intuition. They saw your silence, not your inner fire. They saw your empathy, not your psychological depth, and so they assumed you were predictable, moldable, easily influenced. They assumed you would remain in the roles you played for years. The empath's rise shatters these assumptions, not through confrontation but through transformation. Those who underestimated you will be bewildered. They will be confused by your new presence. They will feel destabilized by your new boundaries. They will not understand how someone so soft could suddenly become so self-possessed. But you were never soft in the way they imagined. You simply chose softness because the world you lived in punished your strength. Now that your inner world is reclaiming its power, the outer world must adjust. And so you step forward with a new kind of authority, not loud, not aggressive, not performative. It is an authority that comes from alignment with the self, with the oldest, deepest part of your psyche. It is the authority of someone who has confronted their own shadow and emerged with clarity. This clarity is not the end of your rise. It is only the threshold. As you stand at this threshold, something within you becomes unmistakably lucid. You begin to see how your entire life was preparing you for this moment, not through grand victories or visible achievements, but through the subtle pressures that shaped your emotional body like a sculptor working in silence. Every disappointment carved a new form. Every betrayal etched a deeper understanding. Every moment of feeling unseen developed an inner sight that does not depend on the eyes. The empath's rise is not created by triumphs. It is created by the wounds that refuse to break you. You were not meant to rise early. You were meant to rise right now. After years of carrying what others projected onto you, after years of being the emotional anchor for people who had no anchor of their own, after years of holding the line in spaces where you were never held, this rise requires that history, because only someone who has lived deeply in emotional shadows can rise with such clarity. Those who have always walked in the light cannot understand the value of illumination. But you understand because you have known prolonged darkness, sometimes imposed by others, sometimes inherited, sometimes unconsciously chosen. And here is the truth. Many empaths struggle to accept. The people around you did not fail to believe in your rise because you were weak. They failed because they only knew the version of you that adapted to them. They never met the version of you that existed beneath those adaptations, the ancient part, the archetypal part, the part that never doubted your potential. That part has been speaking through dreams, through synchronicities, through intuitive whispers that you sometimes ignored but never fully silenced. Now, as you rise, you are finally listening. The process of listening to oneself is deeply sacred. It is an act of reclaiming psychic authority. The world is loud and full of voices, opinions, judgments, expectations, all competing to shape your identity. But none of them know your inner world. None of them have seen the symbolic landscapes that appear to you in moments of solitude. None of them have walked through your nightmares, your visions, your inner forests. None of them have met the self within you, the central archetype that organizes your entire psyche. Only you can hear it. And now that you are listening, its voice grows louder, clearer, more commanding. This voice does not shout. It does not plead. It does not apologize. It speaks with the authority of something eternal. When the self speaks, it does so through quiet conviction, not the conviction of logic, but the conviction of truth. You feel it as a quiet no rising in your body when you encounter something that once trapped you. You feel it as a quiet yes when you step towards something aligned with your deeper nature. This inner guidance is the compass of the rise. It recalibrates your path, redirects your energy, protects you from old patterns. As this compass strengthens, you begin to observe your relationships from a new vantage point, not the vantage point of longing or fear, but of clarity. You see who truly cared for you and who cared only for the comfort you provided. You see the difference between people who loved your soul and people who loved your compliance. You see how many years you spent trying to heal others as a substitute for healing yourself. The empath's rise requires an honest reckoning with these truths. It is not a punishment, it is a purification. You cannot rise while carrying the emotional debris of those who refused to rise with you. At this stage, you may feel a strange sensation, the sensation of your soul pulling away from what once felt familiar. Old friendships may feel brittle. Old roles may feel suffocating. Old patterns may feel intolerable. This detachment is not emotional numbness. It is the psyche withdrawing energy from what no longer serves your individuation. Individuation demands honesty. It demands that you acknowledge when a version of yourself has expired. And so the empath begins to shed, like the serpent in ancient symbolism, leaving behind an identity that was once necessary but is now too small. People often misinterpret this shedding. They think you have become distant. They think you are withdrawing. They think you are pushing them away. But in truth, you are stepping toward yourself. You are stepping toward an inner truth that has been calling to you in dreams for years. You are stepping toward a wholeness that does not require you to fracture your soul to maintain connection. This is the rise, and in this rise, something deep within you awakens the archetype of the inner guardian. For most empaths, this archetype has been dormant, overshadowed by the archetype of the healer. The healer gives, the guardian protects. The healer absorbs, the guardian discerns. The healer understands, the guardian refuses what harms. When the empath's rise begins, these archetypes merge. The result is a person who feels deeply and protects fiercely. A person who sees through illusions and refuses to anchor themselves to them. A person who understands suffering and refuses to carry it unnecessarily. This integration is what makes the rising empath so powerful. Not powerful in a worldly sense, though worldly power may follow, but powerful in the psychic sense. Powerful in presence, powerful in clarity, powerful in emotional stability. This power is unsettling to those who expected you to remain predictable. Your rise exposes the imbalance in their relationships with you. They were accustomed to the version of you that needed nothing, a version of you that gave endlessly, a version of you that apologized for truths that were not yours to apologize for. But now you rise with a new understanding that empathy without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. Compassion without discernment becomes self-sabotage. Healing others without healing oneself becomes a silent form of self-destruction. And so the rise is accompanied by a return to the self, a return so profound that it redefines your entire emotional ecosystem. This return has a dream image, often shared across individuals. The image of a doorway, a narrow door, sometimes old, sometimes dark, sometimes carved with symbols that feel familiar even if you cannot read them. The doorway is always small enough that you can pass through only if you let go of what you carry unnecessarily. This is the archetypal threshold. When the empath approaches this door, they often feel fear, not fear of the unknown, but fear of leaving behind what once served as identity. The psyche fears death more than it fears pain, and every rise requires the symbolic death of the old self. When you pass through this doorway, what awaits you on the other side is not a new world, but a deeper dimension of the world you already inhabit. You begin to sense the emotional currents beneath people's words. You notice the shadows behind their behaviors. You feel the truth of situations before they unfold. This is not paranoia, it is intuition, finally relieved of all the noise that once drowned it out. You are not becoming more sensitive. You are becoming more accurate. The empath's rise sharpens perception. It dissolves illusions. It clarifies motives. And with this clarity comes peace, a peace rooted not in naivety, but in wisdom. This wisdom brings with it a strange but beautiful shift. Your energy becomes harder to access, not because you are withholding it, but because you no longer leak it. Your presence becomes more selective. Your time becomes more valuable. Your emotions become more sovereign. You become someone who can sit in silence without feeling the need to fill it. Someone who can walk away without feeling guilt. Someone who can say no without collapsing into fear. This is the rise. People who once underestimated you will see the difference. They may not understand it consciously, but they will feel it. They will feel the steadiness in your voice. They will feel the boundaries around your presence. They will feel the absence of the old emotional availability they once took for granted. Some will be drawn to this new version of you, sensing its depth and strength. Others will be threatened because your transformation exposes their stagnation. But you will no longer shape yourself around the reactions of others. You are no longer living externally. You are living from the inner self. In this state, something remarkable happens. The empath becomes unmanipulable. You cannot be controlled by guilt. You cannot be swayed by emotional chaos. You cannot be seduced by false promises. You cannot be intimidated by conflict. This does not mean you are detached from emotion. It means you are no longer trapped in it. You feel deeply, but you do not drown. You understand others, but you do not lose yourself. You care, but you do not collapse. This is the psychological maturity of the rising empath, and as this maturity stabilizes, people begin to see you differently. They may not say it, but they feel that you carry an energy they cannot name, an energy that feels ancient, grounded, impenetrable. This is the energy of someone who has integrated their shadow. Most people fear their shadow because they believe it contains only darkness. But for the empath, the shadow contains the qualities they were never allowed to express. The moment these qualities return, the empath becomes whole. Wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness is the ability to hold all parts of yourself without fragmentation. When you reach this wholeness, you no longer oscillate between extremes. You no longer swing between overgiving and emotional collapse. You no longer fluctuate between silence and resentment. You no longer live as a reaction to others. You live as an expression of your deepest truth. This is the essence of the rise, the transformation from an externally shaped identity into an internally rooted one, the shift from emotional survival into emotional sovereignty, the emergence of the self from beneath years of suppression. And now, as this rise reaches deeper into your psyche, you begin to sense the next movement, a movement that will not simply change how you relate to others, but how you relate to your destiny itself. As destiny begins to move through you instead of around you, you sense an inner redirection that cannot be explained logically. Paths you once pursued lose their gravity. Goals you once chased lose their shine. People who once anchored you feel distant. It is not because you are abandoning them. It is because your psyche is no longer orbiting around them. The empath's rise brings with it a profound recentering, a return to an inner axis that does not bend for the sake of belonging. This axis, once activated, begins to guide you with precision. You feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the subtle way your intuition speaks before your mind can interpret it. This is the moment when you realize that the rise was never external. It was never about proving yourself. It was never about becoming stronger than others. It was about ceasing to betray yourself. And once the psyche stops betraying itself, destiny stops resisting you. It begins to unfold as if it had been waiting for you to step into your rightful position. This unfolding is not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, unshakable, because the rise of the empath is not the rise of the ego, it is the rise of the self, the oldest and most sovereign part of your psyche. With this rise comes a new relationship to time. You no longer feel the desperation that once pressured you to act quickly, to give immediately, to rescue impulsively. Time begins to expand around you. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer rush, you consider. You no longer collapse, you contemplate. This slowing is not laziness, it is awareness. It is the internal shift from operating through fear to operating through presence. Presence is the empath's superpower once they rise. It allows you to see what others overlook, to hear what others ignore, to feel what others suppress. And with presence comes discernment, the quality that transforms empathy from a vulnerability into a form of quiet mastery. Discernment is not judgment. Judgment arises from fear. Discernment arises from truth. Judgment seeks to diminish. Discernment seeks to reveal. When the empath begins to use discernment, they no longer attract chaos disguised as connection. They no longer welcome people whose intentions are unclear. They no longer internalize the emotions of those who refuse to grow. Discernment becomes the psychic filter through which your energy is preserved. It is the guardian at the gate of your inner world. With discernment awakened, the empath enters a phase of life where relationships become fewer but deeper. You no longer tolerate half-present interactions, half-hearted promises, half-truths spoken to maintain comfort. You begin to crave sincerity. You begin to crave clarity. You begin to crave resonance connections that align with your frequency instead of draining it. This craving is not a desire, it is a calling. The psyche is directing you toward people who can witness your full rise without fear, envy, or control. People who do not flinch at your truth. People who do not shrink from your intensity. People who do not confuse your depth with complexity. These are the ones who will meet you at the level of your becoming. But to reach these people, you must first walk through a sacred passage, the passage of solitude. Solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself, and for the rising empath, solitude is the crucible where the final stage of transformation occurs. In solitude, the psyche reorganizes itself. It sifts through the remnants of old identities. It releases the echoes of voices that once shaped your self-perception. It dismantles the false narratives you inherited from childhood, family systems, society, and wounded relationships. Solitude becomes the psychological womb in which the new self gestates. During this period, you may feel an almost mystical sense of detachment from certain memories, from certain emotions, from certain versions of yourself. This detachment is not disconnection, it is release. You are releasing the psychic weight of years of emotional over-responsibility. You are releasing the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. You are releasing the fear that your truth will alienate others. The empath cannot rise fully while carrying the remnants of their previous emotional identity. And so the psyche does what it must. It purges. This purge is not always gentle. Sometimes it arrives as tears that feel ancient. Sometimes it arrives as anger you never allowed yourself to feel. Sometimes it arrives as silence, heavy and dense, demanding you to listen deeply. Sometimes it arrives as dreams powerful, symbolic, unsettling. You may dream of fire burning down an old house, symbolizing the dissolution of outdated structures. You may dream of water rising and cleansing a darkened shore, symbolizing emotional renewal. You may dream of meeting a figure, a guide, a shadow, an ancestor who speaks in riddles, yet leaves you with a clarity you cannot articulate. These dreams are not fantasies. They are communications from the unconscious, guiding you through the sacred passage. When the purge is complete, something extraordinary happens. The empath feels space inside themselves. Spaciousness is the first sign of psychological rebirth. It is the absence of unnecessary noise. It is the quiet hum of inner alignment. It is the sense that you are no longer spread thin across emotional landscapes that do not belong to you. This spaciousness is the soil in which your new destiny will grow. And in this new spaciousness, you begin to hear a calling not from the world, but from the self. The calling is not a command, it is a resonance. It pulls you toward certain choices, certain paths, certain truths. The empath's rise activates the archetype of the pathfinder, the one who does not follow external maps, but internal signals. You begin to sense where your energy naturally wants to move, toward creation, toward meaning, toward purpose. toward relationships that expand you instead of shrinking you, toward environments that nourish you instead of draining you. With the rise comes an unexpected shift. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer fear being alone. You no longer fear disappointing others. These fears lose their power because you have returned to yourself. The empath who rises becomes anchored from within, and when you are anchored from within, the world cannot untether you. This inner anchoring gives birth to a new form of presence, a presence that feels grounded, unshakable, quietly commanding. People feel it in you even if they cannot name it. It feels like strength without aggression. It feels like clarity without rigidity. It feels like depth without heaviness. It feels like ancient wisdom carried effortlessly in a modern body. This presence is the hallmark of the individuated empath. And with this presence comes an aura of inevitability. Those who once doubted you feel at first a sense that you are becoming someone they cannot predict, someone they cannot manipulate, someone they cannot diminish. You are no longer the empath who absorbs. You are the empath who transforms. No one believed you had this rise inside you because no one recognized the silent structure of your psyche. They saw the external self, not the inner architecture. But now that the architecture is visible, now that the self stands at the center, you become undeniable. Your destiny begins to move with a momentum that feels both natural and unstoppable. You notice synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that guide you to the right people, the right opportunities, the right insights. This is not magic, it is alignment. When the inner world aligns, the outer world rearranges itself. Life begins to respond to your authenticity instead of your fear. You see doors open that were previously invisible. You see possibilities emerge that once felt unimaginable. This flow is not luck. It is the natural consequence of becoming who you were always meant to be. And now, as the rise reaches completion, something profound reveals itself. You were never underestimated because you were weak. You were underestimated because people mistook your empathy for absence of depth. They mistook your softness for absence of strength. They mistook your silence for absence of clarity. They mistook your patience for absence of power. But the empath who rises does not just rise, they return. They return to their truth. They return to their intuition. They return to their strength. They return to their destiny. Your rise is not revenge. It is not validation. It is not compensation. It is revelation. The revelation of the self emerging after years of burial. The revelation of a soul that finally refuses to dim. The revelation of a mind that no longer collapses under emotional weight. The revelation of a heart that no longer apologizes for its depth. The revelation of the empath entering the very transformation no one believed was possible. And now you stand fully formed in the shadow and the light, aware of both your wounds and your wisdom, carrying both your softness and your sovereignty. This is the rise, not a moment, not a phase, but a return to the truth of your nature, the strength of your spirit, and the destiny that has waited in silence for you to finally claim it. The empath is entering the rise that no one believed they had inside. But you believed it, somewhere deep beneath every wound, every silence, every shadow you always knew.